eyes will be amazed. It's 5090. That's why HFO is here. It's 5090. It's 5090. Good evening, everybody. Have I got the microphone turned on? I have. Have I got echo? I haven't. Have I got a wonky microphone stand? No. Good Lord, what's going to go wrong? Welcome all. It's Sunday once again. It's time for another 5090 show, which this week we'll be talking about equalization, because last week we talked about compression and EQ, or EQ and compression, depending on which way round you use them, such as you won't, are the cornerstones of any mix. But first, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Wobby. Good evening, Jules. Good evening, Mel. Sorry to hear you're feeling a bit ill, but I hope you get better soon. You completely kicked ass at the Confluence live stream yesterday. So, and Array of Emotions is here too. Excellent. The gang's all here. Hurrah. Yeah, hope you're feeling better. I've not wearing me brace, but I am dosed to the gills with Voltarol. So, I'm feeling okay too. Had a good live stream experience last night, and they've asked me to come back and do the next one. So, chuffed to bits about that. So, where are we? It's Twitch. Please follow me if you haven't already. I know you guys have. I do shows on Sundays and Thursdays. The Sunday show is about making the most of the 5090 songwriting challenge. And if you are not aware of the 5090 songwriting challenge, let me introduce you to it. The idea is you write 50 songs in the 90 days between the 4th of July and the 1st of October. There's the website, 5090, all one word, .formers, FAWMERS.org. Form because it's February album writing month, which is 5090's big brother, if you like. Much smaller challenge. You only have to write 14 songs in 28 days during February, but a lot of people take part. 5090 tends to be a little bit more considered. It's more about the diehards, like most of the people on this stream, to be honest. So yes, join in if you feel like improving your songwriting skills, or just hearing loads of new music written by people who just love making music. Array of Emotion says that's because it's for masochists. Well, yeah, you pays your money and you takes your choice. For me, yes, I've actually managed to write at least 50 songs in the how many years have I done it now? I'm actually going to look at my profile because I can't remember. 2020 will be my 8th 5090, and I've nailed it every year. God knows how. Other people in the chat have less songs, but that's totally okay. As Mel says, 5090 is long distance running, form is a sprint, and that is very true. I also find that the extra time for reflection, pausing and reflection in 5090 means that I improve more by taking part in 5090 than I do during form, which is weird. But if you're not watching this on Twitch, you may be watching the archive of this on YouTube, in which case, hello, why weren't you here on Sunday? I've now created separate playlists for the Thursday night general nerding out about music, writing new stuff, live streams, and a separate stream, as I said, for the 5090 stream, which is this one. And this is show number 4 already, which is kind of scary. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done already. Click the like, thumbs up thing down there. Click on the bell if you want to be notified when I chuck a new edited version of the live stream up on YouTube. I am learning so much about video editing, mainly because I've been editing out loads of ridiculous pauses and me going a lot. Or there was something else I started saying a lot of last week, and I noticed that on the edit, and I was obviously conscious of the fact that I didn't want to say so I was saying, I think it might have been anyway. Guppy Wigba says, I like your Rush shirt. R30 tour. Saw them twice on that tour, I think it was. Superb. One of my favourite bands. They may be the band that I have seen more times than any other band I've seen, and that includes even Motorhead. I reckon the final tally for Rush, and I was gutted they didn't do a final farewell tour of Europe, but obviously, as we now know, Neil wasn't up to it. I saw him on every tour from the tail end of the tour of the Hemispheres in 1979. Saw him on every tour. One of those tours didn't visit Europe, so I saw him in Tampa, as you do. So, yes, it's been an odd week, actually, for musicians. We lost Peter Green on Saturday, which was quite a blow, although he was in his 70s. And that generation of musicians, some more than others, did not really look after themselves. So I guess we will be seeing and paying adieu to a lot more artists in the other hand. A note of passing of Dame Olivia Havilland, who passed away today at the phenomenal age of 104. I really didn't think she was ever going to die, to be honest. She was an absolute legend. And her passing marks the end of one of the great Hollywood eras. Ryako Music says, no, not her. Hey, it's been a bad week for Hollywood. We have also lost John Saxon. And everybody in the stream's now going, who the hell's John Saxon? But if you've seen, say, Enter the Dragon, or I think it's Magnum Force, he's one of the bad guys in Magnum Force. He was one of the archetypal Hollywood bad guys. And as Edgar Wright said on Twitter this afternoon, if you were watching a film and you realised John Saxon was in it, it was a better film. And I can think of no finer tribute than that. So, Valet John Saxon. So, squeaky feedback. Gilly Arced on Twitter posted, I don't know if anybody's seen it. I've been having a conversation with her about it. Somebody on Twitter has posted basically a YouTube video of rising frequencies going, look, hey, what's the highest figure you can hear? And I've been pulling that to pieces here in the studio with headphones and a signal analyzer and goodness knows what else, because YouTube compresses things and the signal starts doing very weird things at about 11,800 hertz. and goes completely bonkers before it hits about 14k. And everyone's going, oh, can't hear above 14k. It's like, well, no, I don't think you will, because it's doing all sorts of weird things. But I then took it upon myself to dig out a sine wave generator just to see how bad my hearing is as I approach the golden age of 60 next month. And if I turn my head the right way with these monitors, I could still hear stuff at about 15 kilohertz. And for somebody my age with the gig going experience that I've got, happy with that. And we will be returning to the frequency issue later on in this podcast, or whatever it is, stream, program, show. You'd almost think I'd rehearsed this. So, 5090. I will be doing more listening and commenting this week. There is a thing on 5090 where you listen and leave comments to other people's stuff. And in fact, that is the secret of 5090. It's not only the secret of making your 5090 a success, it's also the secret, don't tell anybody else, of getting better at writing songs of your own. Because listening to other people's songs and reflecting on how they made you feel, or what you liked about them, or the technical positives, or maybe even the negatives, if you're that kind of person, how they work for the song and what stops the song getting to your emotional center and what helps the song getting to your emotional center. And it's that sort of stuff that you need to do as a songwriter. And it's a great, great forum for doing it. And you'll make lots of friends. A lot of the people that take part in 5090, I am now very proud to call my friends. Wobby is one of them. I can't remember. I think Mel talked me into doing Form back in the day, or we were both talked into doing Form by one of our fellow William Gibson board members. It may actually have been Lithos posting a link to Form on the William Gibson board as was, saying, "Oi, have you thought of doing this?" And we did. And here we are. And since I started taking part, and this is how sad I am, if I go to my Dropbox page, I have a spreadsheet. And I have a spreadsheet that keeps track of how much music I've made. No, smart viewer, I don't want you to show me it. I want it. So there you go. 692 songs. And actually it's more than that, because I have now written 12 songs for 5090. So there you have it, folks. I have just broken the 700 songs written barrier on 5090. How about that? So, duly saved. Ryako Music says, nerd. Yeah, it takes one to know one, dear. So, yeah, so I've been quite busy. Apart from the 12, actually, that's a point. It's actually 703, because apart from the songs that I've done as 5090, I also ended up writing and then performing a 30-minute symphonic piece live on YouTube last night, and that is available to watch on the Lockdown Livestreamers YouTube channel. I'll put a caption up here for YouTube viewers to go and watch it. But I was amazed that this morning when I had a look to see how many people had actually gone over and watched it after it was broadcast, it had 91 viewers in the first 12 hours, which is like, oh, okay. So that was great fun. I'm worried you put 5090 2020 in the... No. There is a separate miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is my songs that were not written for 5090 or for form. If I go back, there you go. You see Misk is 21, 5090 is 12. If I'm going to add that symphonic thing, so that's actually now 22. So there you go, 703 songs. In the 10 years before I started doing this, I think I wrote 3 songs. So if you're worried about your songwriting chops, taking part in 5090 will give them a good kick up the backside and get them to get on with it. And that's absolutely what you have to do. Do the work. So comments are important. I'll be doing more listening and commenting this week because I want to get in the Century Club, and the Century Club is people who have taken part in 5090 and have made 100 or multiples thereof comments on other people's stuff, which is a kind of a way of judging your participation in the community. So you can see at the moment I've got 64 song comments made. I've made 31 soundboard posts on various people's soundboards, which is their profile page, and I've made 39 forum posts. So I need to get my act together and get me numbers up. So is that going to do anything? There we go. That's me. So that's me so far. 12 songs, and I've really come over a bit 1980s with the stuff I've been doing recently, because it's got all my synths, retro synths at the back of me here. A 1982 or 3-ish JX3P on the top, Juno 106, which is slightly more modern underneath it. The old Warhorse Juno 60, which is so old it does not have MIDI. And then the baby of the bunch is the Korg M3 at the bottom, which is a Korg M3 expanded with a radius expansion board and memory and stuff like that, and is basically a composition workstation and is amazing, and I love it. And I spend way too much time playing it rather than developing my other chops like guitar playing and stuff like that. So take part in form for a couple of years, take part in 5090 for a couple of years, pay attention to the people who are doing 5090 or form with you. You will recognize in those couple of years that the people who are making the improvements are the people who are also making the comments and listening, because, as I said, it's that making comments and listening that helps you improve your own chops. So you've trained your ears by listening to other people's stuff, but what have you trained your ears to recognize? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we go back to screen 1. Following last week's car crash with my compression slideshow, I have been tweaking things, and I have been testing obsessively to be able to just do this by pressing S5. Look at that. Didn't even have to switch it to the other screen. That, ladies and gentlemen, is technology triumphant. Or rather, it's Chris triumphant over technology. So, the 5090 show, equalization. What is it? Do you need it? Have you ever heard it being carried out? And what happens when it goes wrong? So those are the sort of questions that I'm going to talk about tonight. Last week, if you remember, we talked about compression. The two basic foundations of a mix are compression and equalization. Some people compress what they're doing first and then equalize it. Other people equalize it first and then compress it. It's really up to what works for you, which is why your mileage may vary. This is my take on a complex and, frankly, a highly subjective topic. So feel free to disagree, jeer, boo loudly, or hiss, or just nod sagely saying, yeah, Chris knows what he's talking about. Chris isn't sure he knows what he's talking about, but we'll get there when we come to it. So, what is equalization? Well, there are lots and lots of websites that I looked at, and I couldn't really come up with a decent definition other than it makes things equal, which was just stating the obvious, really. So I've come up with my own definition. And my definition is that it is the process of balancing frequencies in a piece of music to help achieve the creative intent of the artist. Ryoko Music says, Chris totally knows what he's talking about, so everyone can shush, lol. Yeah, I wish. Mel, I really wish. But I can baffle them with bullshit sometimes. But I've worked in L&D, learning and development, for nearly 40 years, and as a trainer, I know the golden rule of training, which is when you don't know something, you don't try and bullshit your way through it. You just say, I don't know, and I'll look it up. Wobby says, very nice, the definition. Thank you. I've been thinking about this sort of presentation for a few days, so that's what I came up with. Anyway, now we know what equalization is, and it's that creative intent of the artist is important because different people hear things in different ways, and really what your role is in doing equalization, if you're not the person who actually came up with the sounds in the first place, is making sure that the person involved is happy with what you're doing to the sound, because you can do serious damage to the sound of an instrument by EQing it wrong. So, what's the frequency, Kenneth? Yes, I know that's a musical reference that is now, what, 30 years old, 25 years old? Don't care. One of the things about making music and producing music and mixing and mastering music is, and frankly, I'm sorry, but this is the science bit. You've got to know your frequency ranges. You've got to know what makes what sound at what frequency. What am I on about? Okay. See, I was talking about the range of human hearing earlier. So the range of human hearing is roughly, and this is for people in perfect health without tinnitus or anything else who have not ruined their hearing by driving around in open-top sports cars, which a mate of mine did. He had a 15 decibel hearing loss in one ear compared with the other, and it was the ear that was in the slipstream of the car when he had the top down. So, yes, steer clear of convertibles, kids. They're bad for you. An average person, or a person with good hearing, should be able to detect something in the deep bass at 20 hertz. That's 20 cycles per second at the low end, up to the extremely high end of roughly 20 kilohertz, 20,000 hertz. And if you get yourself a decent set of headphones or monitor speakers, they really should be representing as much of that range as you can get away with. I think my KRK monitors make it down to about 60 or 70 hertz. I've got some Bowers and Wilkins speakers for the hi-fi downstairs, and I think they get down to about 30 hertz and then offload everything below 30 hertz to the Paradigm subwoofer, which will go down to about 15, which is ridiculous. Really, 20 kilohertz is way, way above the output of most musical instruments. Bats, on the other hand, have a hearing range which has been shown to stretch up to, get this, 150,000 hertz. So 150 kilohertz. So that's way off the right-hand edge of this graph. But I was saying musical instruments don't really go beyond this, so let's pick some musical instruments first of all. And yeah, I'm not going to get into the argument about A should actually be 432 hertz. If you don't know about the arguments that have taken place over the last couple of centuries about what frequency the A below middle C should be, go and read up on the internet. It's mad. Personally, the older I get, the more I'm coming around to the A should be 432 hertz rather than A should be 440 hertz, but I always was a bit weird. So, I'm mainly a guitarist. My guitar range is roughly that. Runs from about 60 hertz at the low end to about 1200 hertz, 1.2K on the high end. Unless, of course, you've got an extended range guitar like me, in which case it goes significantly further down. In fact, it goes lower down than the bass guitar range, which is down to about 40 hertz. If you've got a voice, your range is roughly going to be that. So you're in the mid bass to the middle mid-range, upper mid-range, depending on who you are. If I'd had more time, I would have plonked down a piano keyboard, which runs from about there. If you can see the mouse, can you see the mouse cursor, guys? Or am I just wobbling the mouse about regardless? Yep, good. Yeah, I bet Mel's frequency will be beginning to move into the piccolo range there. Which goes up to 5K. And the piccolo is kind of the highest pitch musical instrument that isn't a percussion instrument, because the triangle, some of the overtones in a triangle must go way, way up into the teens of kilohertz. And the percussion aspect of it is very, very interesting, because remember I was talking about transients? Well, the combination of transients and the low frequencies in the kick drum are what give it its character. And the transients can be way, way down at the low end. And then the ring of the kick drum is what tends to drift up into the upper bass and the low mid-range. And the snare, I was actually surprised, because I expected the snare to be higher than this. But I was doing my research this afternoon, and that was the sort of frequency range that they reckoned a snare would have. And if you ever listen to massively compressed MP3 files, and I'm talking like less than 128 kilobits a second, so basically anything that SoundCloud pipes at you, then you will notice that compression really mangles the high end and the extremely high end. And the one thing that's a dead giveaway is when you listen to cymbals on a track, because cymbals at high compression just sound like somebody frying bacon. It's horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. And we'll come on to ear training in a bit. But one lesson that I still remember, and I went to his presentation at least 15 years ago, was by the record producer who's based in Berlin called Pole. And somebody said, what's the best way for me to train my ears? And Pole's immediate response was simple and very, very clear. He said, throw away your MP3 files. Don't listen to them. Listen to CDs. Right. On that bombshell, let's start at the source. Start at the source means making sure that whatever you're recording sounds as good as possible. We talked about this last week. We talked about it as well when I talked about mic placement a couple of shows ago. You are not going to get a good song or a good rendition of a song if your source material sounds like it's been recorded from the other end of a rugby pitch. Get the audio right, and you won't waste your time using EQ to remedy problems, because those problems won't have existed in the first place. I mean, if I'm working on audio, you can hear, I hope you can hear if your speakers, that I've now moved closer and I've kicked in the proximity effect. So there's a lot more low mids and upper bass in my voice. And if I go back to here, they all disappear again. And it's that kind of patchiness from this to this that maybe you'd want to fix to make your artist's audio sound better. But get them to stand the right distance away from the microphone in the first place, and you won't have to do all that work in the first place. So don't tell yourself you'll fix it in the mix. The golden rule of EQ: do as little of it as possible. Comes back to the previous slide. Get your source right in the first place. You won't have to EQ it. I went to a talk by a guy who was an engineer at Abbey Road, and his book's in the other room. And if you'll give me a second, I'll just go and get it because I'm going to recommend it. So the book is called From Abbey Road to Ziggy Stardust. And it's by a guy called Ken Scott. And Ken worked with pretty much everybody. There he is in much younger days with Mr. George Harrison. But he was tape op for George Martin. I think, if I remember rightly, the first studio session he actually was put in charge of pressing record at the appropriate time on the tape recorder was with the Beatles. So there's some of his pictures from Abbey Road. But the reason why Ken Scott's book came to mind was that when I went to see him talk, he talked about getting it right at the source. And when he was recording Jeff Beck on some of Jeff Beck's classic early albums, he literally had Jeff Beck's Marshall stack put in the corner of the room with a microphone in front of it. And that was it. There were no fuzz pedals, there was no reverb, no echo, no equalization, nothing else. It was literally just a Marshall and a microphone. And those albums, if you listen to that guitar tone, why would you want to do anything else? So he spent the time getting it right at the first place. And he didn't have to do anything after that. So when you make something equal to something else, when you want to get everything leveled out, do you boost or cut? Additive EQ is when you make a frequency louder. And if you've ever been working on songs and you've made one thing louder, you will very, very soon realise that it usually makes things worse. Ryako Music says, that is a valid and important job, the button pressing. Mel, Ken Scott tells a story about when they were recording Glass Onion. There are two aspects of the button pressing. One is that you press record at the right time, and two, that you make sure that when you press record, the tracks that the record producer and the artist expect to be recorded over are actually the tracks that are being recorded. And when they started Glass Onion, he got it wrong. And he taped over the snare drum, and he actually has all the master tapes digitized, and he was able to play us the talk back, and you can just hear Ringo going, "Hey, where's the snare?" And it had gone, erased. Fortunately for Ken, John Lennon's reaction was, "Oh, never mind, I like it like that." And that's how the snare disappeared from Glass Onion. So, going back to additive EQ, boosting stuff will often make things worse, because when you boost one thing, you suddenly realise that something else needs boosting because it's now being trampled over by the thing that you boosted in the first place. So you end up with a sort of arms race of everything ending up louder than everything else, and eventually like Quincy Jones did when they were mixing Thriller. They got to about mix number 53, and Quincy Jones said, let's just go back and listen to mix number 3. And mix number 3 ended up being the one that was on the album. So if you don't boost something, you can cut it. Subtractive EQ makes a frequency quieter. It's the safer option. And I can vouch for this. In the past couple of years, I have become increasingly savage in the amount that I will cut a track by. So whereas most of my tracks would be sitting round about -6 to -12 dB in a mix, I'm now frequently pushing stuff back to -15 and -20 dB in a mix, and then letting the maximizer do the work at the end. And the difference in how all the different tracks sit together is quite astonishing. And it is just through having everything quieter and less energy in the mix, and then bringing it all up in the final mastering stage of something. That's one of the biggest surprises for me in working, and this is working with tools like Isotopes, Neutron and Ozone, which are the sort of track EQ and the mastering EQ and compression and whatever else on the end. It has completely changed my perception of how I use EQ in a mix, which is kind of interesting. So, parameters for equalization. There are 4 main ones that you need to know about. Frequency, so it's which frequency are you going to boost, because if your cymbals are making a mess of your mix, you're not going to want to boost the frequencies of the bass drum. Gain is how much do you boost or how much do you cut. It's all right, it's not exactly volume, but for the purposes of tonight, it's how loud or how much louder or softer you want to make that frequency. Slope is the fact that you're not just making one frequency quieter, you're also affecting the frequencies on either side of that frequency. And slope is how fast the effects of your equalization roll off on adjacent frequencies, which is, strangely enough, why it's also sometimes called roll off. And then, and this is the one that amuses the hell out of me, it's known as the quality factor these days. It's the resonance. It's to do with how fast a particular frequency is damped off the main frequency. It's known as quality factor because it was originally just called Q. And it was originally just called Q because Mr. K.S. Johnson of the Western Electric Company's engineering department was experimenting with induction coils, and he needed a letter to represent a variable for the qualities that he was measuring in the induction coils, and Q was the only one that hadn't already been picked. So that's why EQ is measured with Q. Well, it's not measured. I mean, it is a unitless quantity. It is literally just a number, which is most bizarre. And as a scientist, I find hugely unsettling, but that's another story. These are representative EQ plugins. So the notch filter there, and I'll explain what all these notch filters and high-pass filters and EQ8 and EQ3 and Neutron are as we continue. But despite them all looking bizarrely different, because you've got to let the user interface guys have their fun. Shout out to Array of Emotions here. I'm sure he'll agree with me that Neutron is by far the prettiest of all of these, but whether it actually gives the most clear message, I am not in a professional capacity to say. They all deal with those 4 parameters, so they all let you adjust the frequency. So the high-pass filter lets you adjust, so that's set at 1K, the notch filter set at 60K. And if you're sharp, you may have guessed that that notch filter is therefore designed to cut out mains hum in America. Array of Emotion says, Neutron looks all right. Yeah, the grey boxes are from Audacity, so they are minimalist to the extreme and then beyond. The EQ8, which is an 8-band EQ, and the EQ3, which is a 3-band EQ, are from Ableton, which is my DAW of choice. So all of these plugins let you change the frequency on which they act. However, not all of them let you adjust the gain. Like they don't all let you adjust how much they act by. With the notch filter, that's pretty understandable because you just want anything that's a 60 hertz hum to have gone away. The high pass filter as well we'll come on to that, but it's effectively like a wall that you don't want stuff to appear beyond the wall. And the EQ8 down there, you actually have fancy knobs to twiddle. You can adjust what frequency they affect by moving these little circles, and you get 8 of them. With the EQ3, you just have 3 different frequency peaks that you can adjust, although for the low and the high, you can actually change where the peak is. So that's your gain. That's how much your signal gets cut or boosted by the equalization. Slope, or as I said, roll off. It's the steepness of these curves. It's this bit here. So it's how fast the high cut stops stuff happening. So at the moment on that's actually, I always have the high cut on Ableton set to the 4 times. So it literally rolls off 4 times faster than the standard setting. And then Q, our quality factor, or it's also known as resonance, is the width of this notch. It's how much the adjacent frequencies are affected by what you're doing. And as you can see, high pass filter doesn't really have one. Instead, it's got the roll off. The EQ3 is so basic, it just says, no, I'm deciding what your roll off is going to be, and you're stuck with it. The EQ8 on Ableton, you can fiddle to your heart's content, and a massive range. So you can have something that's a savage peak. So this is a resonant shelf, or you can have a quite sedate roll off like that, low shelf. So let's get into all the different types of IQ that you are going to encounter in your adventures making music, whether you're using Audacity or Cakewalk or Ableton or Reaper or Pro Tools or Logic or anything else. If you've got one of the more up-to-date versions of Audacity, they've removed the traditional EQ filters and put some fancy ones in instead. But the fancy ones kind of do the same thing, so don't worry about it. So a low cut is a high pass filter. See, remember the transfer function last week where you had input signal and output signal? Well, this, you've basically got input signal and frequency. So this is what the EQ will do at a particular frequency. So you can see that 0 dB line at the moment means it's not going to do anything. So for the majority of frequencies, anything above, I don't know, 200, 250, maybe 300 hertz, this particular EQ isn't going to do anything. But it's going to savagely get rid of everything below about 30 or 40 hertz. And that level of frequency is normally just rumble, and even basic traffic noise coming into the building will be picked up by some mics at that. And there are very, very few, if any, instruments where you're going to be interested in the low cut, in the low frequencies that are down at that end, to the point that this desk actually has a button for each channel here, and I've actually got it enabled on the Shure SM7, so if I press it, you can't really hear any difference with it out or with it engaged. But on this desk, it takes everything out of the signal below 100 hertz. So a low cut is a high pass filter. It passes any frequency above about 100 hertz without doing anything with it. So if a low cut is a high pass filter, you've probably already figured out that a high cut is a low pass filter. And there's Cakewalk's equalizer, and that's preset as a low cut. So it's pretty gentle, and it starts at it's saying that's 30. Cakewalk has weird graphs. So I don't know if you can see it, but the units on this graph at the bottom are 31 hertz, 62 hertz, 125, 250, 500, and then it starts getting sensible. So you've got 1K, 2K, 4K, 8K, and 16K. Go figure. So your low cut gets rid of the rumble. What's the high end get rid of? It gets rid of hiss and staticky noise that you might have in the mix, and you might have buzzy and really irritating cymbals, and you might have sibilance in somebody's speech, which will be very high frequencies, much higher than the human vocal range. And a high cut gets rid of them all. Ryako Music says that thing looks wacky and confusing. It is actually quite simple, because the little yellow dots are and as they are in Ableton, they're the actual band of the EQ that you're working on. So in each case, you've got 6 in Cakewalk, you've got 8 in this plugin in Ableton. You can choose what sort they are, and these buttons basically let you pick between all the different types of filter that we're currently going through. So you can see band 1 here is set to a low pass filter. These are bell or curve, and these are shelf. And we'll come on to those right now. So shelving EQ, you can either having a boosting shelf or a cutting shelf, and you can have a low shelf or a high shelf. So this example here, both the low and the high are set to cut. So there is about a 6 or 7 dB cut in the frequencies below 100 hertz, and there is a similar cut of about 6 or 7 decibels in the high frequencies above about, what's that? It's about 5K, isn't it? So it's getting rid of a lot of the energy of the cymbals. Similarly, if this was Ableton, I could grab that 4 and drag it upwards, and it would then boost by whatever amount I'd set to do the same, to enhance something, to give more sparkle or more presence to a particular instrument in the mix. In the middle, it's not doing anything. So this is the most common type of EQ that I use, which is just a bell curve, and it's a bell curve because it looks like a bell. Again, it can either boost or cut frequencies. This one in Neutron is just a standard run-of-the-mill bell. There are other types of bell curve which we'll come into. There are other types of shelver that we won't go into those this evening, because otherwise we'd be here for another hour. So you can either boost or cut frequencies. In Neutron, you can grab these little handles and pull them left or right to make that bell spread out. So you're effectively adjusting the Q, or you can just click on the Q in the little window there and enter the number that you want, if that's the way you like altering things. If you make your bell curve really aggressive, you can use it as a notch filter. So notch filters tend to be used just to cut frequencies. As we saw with the one in Audacity, a notch at 60 hertz is intended to get rid of mains hum if you are in the United States. Here in the UK, I'd use a notch filter for 50 hertz, and that would do the same thing to get rid of mains hum if any of the mains adapters in my pedal board started misbehaving and transmitting stuff through. You may have a fundamental, and you may have harmonics of the original buzz that you also wish to get rid of, and the Notch 4 plugin in Ableton lets you get rid of the harmonics as well. Comb filtering is kind of the same thing taken to extremes. It happens when your existing signal is overlaid on the same signal that is very, very, very slightly delayed. It's something that isn't quite a phaser and isn't quite chorus or isn't quite a flanger. And if you've got really good ears, I am informed, although I haven't, that you can also hear comb filtering if you wear a hat. And to be honest, I can hear some of it in here at the moment because the studio is under the bed. I have a surface here, and that means that as well as the signal from the monitor, which is literally right next to the camera, it's coming to my ears directly, but it's also hitting the top of the bed. Most of it's being absorbed, but not all of it. And that extra delay in the reflected signal reaching to me means that I get comb filtering. And if you've ever walked past, I get them when I walk past, there's a line of garages and they've got loads and loads of big sheets of concrete walls. And if I walk past, I can actually hear the comb filtering taking place on the sound of my footsteps as I walk past. It's a weird phasery noise, and I can demonstrate for you. So here we have my latest piece of music, which is getting totally down the BBC Symphony Orchestra Spitfire Audio Discoverer package. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to intentionally drop a device which is available in Max for Live, which is a comb filter. And the reason it's provided is because you can tune them. So I can actually, if you look at this, let me just show you. So if, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but the left and right channels on this comb filter package, which I'm going to actually drop on the master. Right, so it's now on the master. I'm going to bypass it. So I'm trying to think what, let's just check what key I wrote. So this is in A minor. So what I'm going to do is I am going to set the pitch left. If we do the minor triad, so A minor triad, C3 will be fine for the second note of the A minor triad. Let's push that up to E. So the comb filtering effect should now actually make a sort of chord. So I'm going to disable it. So this is what the track sounds like without it. And now I'll kick it in. And then take it out again. Can change the pitch. So you get the idea. It's nasty, and it is usually viewed, despite the fact that a plugin allows you to add it intentionally. Bye-bye, plugin. It is normally regarded as something to be avoided. So let's get rid of me. So let's just go back. So yes, it's usually classed as something to be avoided. So what it's doing, and I actually took a screenshot of the pitches of the waveform of that piece of music as it was playing. So that was the input signal, and you can see that they're irregularly spaced spikes where it's letting the frequencies through. So it's like a reverse notch. You get lots and lots and lots of spikes, and you can actually make them wobble and do weird things, and you get that sort of speaking down a drain pipe type sound that is typical of comb filtering. And as I say, in fact, it was Ken Scott who said it. He wouldn't let people. There were one or two artists who he worked with who tried wearing a hat in the mixing room, and he said, "Oh no, that'll cause comb filtering. Take your hat off." And I'm pretty sure one of the people he told to take his hat off was probably David Bowie, because he worked on most of Bowie's early stuff. Right. So if that's a filter that you don't want to happen, here's another one that you kind of do. If rather than a notch, you might want a band pass filter, which allows through a particular range of frequencies. So in Ableton, there's one called a band pass spinner, and again, as you saw with the comb filter, it just means you can wobble the frequency range that it lets through, and you get a really interesting effect that DJs tend to use quite regularly. It's a kind of phasery type sound. Multiband parametric equalizers are basically a whole bunch of basically, that was the other word I used a lot last week, and I vowed that I wouldn't be using this week. So I definitely need a klaxon to stop that. A multiband or parametric EQ is a whole bunch of bandpass filters, so you can boost or cut. Kind of in the same way as the 8-band or 6-band or 3-band EQ, but it does it a lot more widely. And then combining this week's subject matter with last week's subject matter, we come to dynamic EQ. And a dynamic equalizer is an EQ that is also a compressor. So this is dynamic EQ in Ozone, and you can see you've got the different types of filter on the left. So there's a Baxendale bass, which is a fancy type of low shelf, a band shelf, a peak bell, a proportional Q, which is a fancy type of bell, and a Baxendale treble, which is a fancy type of high-end shelf. So you adjust it in the same way. You pick a frequency, you pick the range of adjacent frequencies that it acts on with your Q, which is, there it is, it's set to 2. You've got gain as normal, which is set as 1.4 decibels. But you notice we've also got the transfer function diagram that we were using last week when we were talking about compressors. And it's got all the compressor controls. It's got a threshold, so it won't kick in below minus 30 dB. It's auto scale, which is effectively, now trying to think where the ratio is on this. It's probably hidden somewhere when you click on the button. But you've got the attack and release as you have in a normal compressor. What that means is that this particular boost will only work when signals hit above minus 30 dB. So anything below that, it will stop working. And that tends to be used to enhance periodic sounds, or maybe a singer's voice, that you don't want to occur in the rest of the mix. So if the singer's much louder, this will make it proportionally even more louder. Similarly, you might also want a really irritating low mid or high bass note, maybe a resonance in a bass drum. You can get rid of it if it gets really loud by making the compressor reduce the signal rather than increase the signal. Ryako Music says, I really like dynamic AQ. Mate, with Ozone, if I sometimes use the mastering assistant and it says, no, you don't need dynamic EQ, I switch it on anyway. I'm that much of a rebel. I love it. So we've gone through all the different types. And at this point, you're probably saying, yes, but what does it sound like? So let's go back to my demo piece of music and load up an equalizer and I can show you. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop just a neutron equalizer, which has all the different sorts in it. First of all, I'm going to show you a little DJ trick, which I picked up a while ago. So for that, I'm going to use Ableton's very normal 8-band EQ. And we'll just use the piano one. But what I'm going to do is effectively turn off all this. So turn off that, turn off that, turn off that. So the only one I'm going to use is this. And you see, this is a resonant EQ. So rather than it actually cutting just before it starts to cut, it will perversely boost a signal so that you don't hear a relative loss in the energy at the low end, because it's compensating for the fact that this area of the graph isn't there anymore by adding a new area of the graph above the line here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab the LFO from Max for Live. This is a lovely little gag. So my LFO is set at 1 Hertz, and that's fine for the moment. So it's effectively generating a sine wave. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button here, which is the Max for Live's map function. So now the next thing that I click on is going to be varied according to the LFO here. And what I'm going to click on is this. So that's probably a bit violent, so I'm going to lower the depth so it doesn't wobble quite as much as that. And now if I play you the track, this is what it sounds like. Well, let's disable it first so that I'm not actually doing anything, and then I'll bring it in and enable it. Here we go. Slow it down. Or I can synchronize it to a note. So here's me bringing in the frequency. So I'm actually dropping the frequency at which the signal is cut and bringing in more of the signal. And now I've got the full signal. And I can do the same at the other end. Classic DJ drop. Or it would be if the track hadn't finished. Oh. You hear how it's just the bass and the kick drum that are coming through. So that's your high pass and low pass filters. So now let's go to Ableton, and I'm going to go to Neutron. I'm just bringing the Neutron 3's equalizer, but I'm going to drop it on the master track so it affects on anything. So at the moment, here we go. It's got 4 bands chosen at the moment, but they're absolutely not doing a thing. So it's absolutely flat on 0 dB. So if I play it, we get the flat signal. You can see the bandwidth or the frequency spectrum of where all the energy is, and there's something nice going on there, which is at about 450. It's at about A, and as this is in A minor, I'm kind of expecting that peak is probably 440. So what I can do is boost that. Enough, and it's actually beginning to overload, so I can actually do the reverse. So I've now got a notch filter, and listen what happens if I move it around. Much more of an effect on the higher frequencies. So what we've got here, we've got a high shelf, so I can just make the high frequencies louder. Or I can make them quieter. And yes, congratulations, we've invented the tone control. So I can do that at the high end, and of course I can do it at the low end. You see the kick drum really causing a lot of energy on that bit. So that gives you an idea of the kind of very, very quick rough guide to what these things actually sound like. But as with all of these things, the only way you are really going to learn what these do is by throwing equalization on your own stuff and playing with it and see what it sounds like when you mess about with it. See if you like the effects, because after all, if it's your music and you want to achieve the closest thing to the artist's vision, then you want to know what all of these things do that will help you as an artist achieve the vision that you've got. So listen to your stuff, train your ears, and learn to recognize what's causing the problems. I mean, there was a lot overloading in that clip at the end, and I don't know if you noticed the master level meters in Ableton were in the red, so I was completely blowing things out. So again, one of the things that I do would be to chuck a limiter on that signal chain at the end, which is the compressor that basically says I'm not going to let anything louder than minus 0.3 dB through. But again, use decent source material. Spend your time getting the source material right. Somebody posted on one of the forums that I follow that it's the last 10% of a job that takes 90% of the resources. And a lot of the reason for that is because you get to the last 10%, you think, oh, bugger, we should have done that differently to start with. Well, you can save all that grief if you use decent source material. Mel says, Ryako Music says, it's the crap in, crap out mentality. An Array of Emotions says, that's very true. Concerning the last 10%. Yeah, far more even than the Pareto analysis, the 80-20 rule that, 80% of the work happens in 20% of the time, and then it's the real rest. It's basic project management, David says. Now, beware of presets. If I go back to Ableton, you will notice in Ableton, if I go to Audio Effects and go to EQ8, that it has shed loads of preset EQ curves. So I've got a cymbal EQ number 1 for cymbals. I've got another one for floor. I've got another 2 for floor toms, 2 for hi-hats, 4 for kick drums, 2 for rack toms, 3 for snares. And then instruments, I've got 2 acoustic guitars, a bright acoustic guitar, a clear acoustic guitar, a modern and a vintage electric bass, an electric guitar with 1 EQ, 2 EQs, a funky electric guitar, 2 different sorts of pianos, and 2 different sets of strings. And you may be forgiven for thinking that if you have a piano on your track, you will make it sound perfect if you just drop a piano EQ on it. And who knows, you may do. But if I move the equalizer out of the way and just drop it, we'll drop the first piano EQ on there. So you can see, well, I hope you can see, it's boosting everything at about 200 hertz. There's a dip down to about normality at about 1000 hertz. And then another slight, and it is slight, it's only like 2.5 decibel boost in the high mids or the low highs. And yet if we look at piano 2, it's kind of different. There's an awful lot more boosting going on at the high end. So you will get a very, very different sounding piano from the same audio source material. And I can very quickly demonstrate that for you if you want. So let us go to our synth. So let's pick a piano that I've got here. Piano and keys. So we'll just have a fairly average grand piano. That'll do, won't it? So this is Ableton Sampler, and if I, whoops. So you can see I have my trusty Ableton push already lined up, and it's all the blue squares on here are A's because it knows I want to play in a A minor. So if I solo this track so we don't get anything else, so there's no reverb on it whatsoever. I can actually, well, it says it's 15%, but I think it's lying. Let's turn that up a bit. Let's have about 42%. There's a bit now. So that is the generic piano sound that I say I've recorded it. So what happens if I drop in my first piano equalization curve? So I'm going to play, and at the same time, because I am that good at this, I am going to start by playing with the EQ curve disabled, and then I'm going to click on the mouse so you can hear it enabled. subtle, but there is something there. Ryako Music says, I suppose that if you tend to EQ an instrument the same way, you can create your own preset and alter it as needed. Absolutely. I actually have somewhere an EQ preset for my Ibanez 9-string guitar, which tends to bring out the grrr when I'm using it for gent. So that piano EQ didn't really set the world on fire, did it? It wasn't exactly what you call noticeable. So here's the second one. So again, same deal. Yeah, there's a bit more high end in that. I can hear the difference on the speakers here, but I'm not entirely convinced you'd be able to hear it. But I guess if you were winding that up, that you would probably hear something. And again, there's no gain on this, so it is literally just working on about 6.57 dB up at the top end. So, back to our presentation. Beware of presets. Listen to what you're doing. Listen to what your EQ is. Not listen to your EQ. Listen to what your ears are telling you about what the EQ is doing to the track. And pay attention to your ears rather than those fancy little graphs, because the graphics might mislead you. And your computer may be lagging, and your computer may be lying to you. Who knows? So listen. What are your ears telling you about what the EQ is doing to your mix? And adjust accordingly. And what did we learn earlier? The best way of adjusting is to cut rather than to boost, because you are likely to make everything worse if you boost. Ryako Music says, do you feel like you play piano differently on the push versus the Korg? Like, do you notice a big difference in velocity sensitivity? That's a really good question. Yes, and yes. I tend to be very, very simplistic when I'm using the push. The push is great for creating chordal work because, and if I go back to, if we go back to Ableton, and I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the fact that, in fact, let's do this the other way around. We'll do, I should have this set up. No, maybe don't, but you don't need to see Ableton. So you can see at the top, there is a nifty set of selection buttons. So I'm currently in A minor, but I can scroll through Dorian, Mixolydian, Lydian, Phrygian, Locrian. So if I go to one of my synth beds and press note to arm the track, as it is telling me to do, I now don't get anything. Why am I not? Oh, that's because I soloed the other track. Right, so here's the synth. And it's playing a nice arpeggiated note. So if I hold down just standard shapes, I can get some really, I'm basically guaranteed to get a decent chord out of it. Or octaves. Get really fancy. So if I drop a synth pad in, so you can actually just hear, rather than it because the ARP's getting in the way. So where's a nice strings? A nice string pad will do. Full layer of strings. That's rather nice. So if we go back to my synth layer, those are the single notes it'll play, but I can play chords now, and they'll all be in Locrian mode, no matter what buttons I press. And I'll tell you what, you do this in Mixolydian and you get all sorts of absolutely beautiful sounds. Drop a bit of reverb on that and you're golden. So let's do it. Nice bit of concert hall reverb, I think. At about 50%. Maybe an octave lower, and let's bring it up a bit so you can hear a bit better. So yeah, for a compositional tool, being able to do that and just come up with really sort of bizarre chords is hugely useful. I've been doing that an awful lot for the last couple of years. Areva Motion says, regarding trust your ears, it's the same in photography. Yeah, it absolutely is. Some people will say the color charts need to look a certain way to be proper, but it all comes down to how it looks to you instead of what the charts say. Absolutely. And one thing that I've been told time and time and time again on online mixing courses or home recording podcasts or YouTube instructional videos is, if you've got a system like this, and when you're mastering, and let's actually put ozone on the mastering track, it is very dangerous when you're mastering with ozone to just get carried away by staring at the fancy waveforms. So even if all I've got on the track is an equalizer, if I press play, and then you add some of the other visualization things like an imager, which tells you where all the different parts of the track are in the stereo field, or as a polar level, so I can say where my stereo mix is coming from. And it's all really pretty. But the trouble is, as humans, we evolved to be visual animals, and our visual field will overload everything else, and we start ignoring what our ears are telling us. And that is the last thing you want to be doing when you're working on mixing or mastering a track. You've got to listen to what your ears are telling you. So, if we go back once again, we've come to the end. That concludes the 5090 Show Guide to Equalization, presented by yours truly. Thank you for listening and watching. So, a bit longer than normal, but I think we kind of got some interesting stuff out of the way there. So, I hope that was useful or thought-provoking, or, maybe just inspired you to do something a bit different. Rev Emotion says, cool, that was interesting. Good. Then I've achieved what I set out to do this evening. It's a difficult and intimidating subject, especially when, you fire up a door for the first time and you see all these windows and strange things. And it's even worse when you start using plugins like Neutron or Ozone or, any of the many freely available and totally free compressors and EQ and mastering limiters and whatever else there are out on the internet. And there are a whole bunch of websites that will list the best ones this year. So use a popular search engine and look for 2020 best EQ plugins. You will find some that will not cost you a penny. Download them, give them a go, and see what things make your stuff sound better. That's kind of what it comes to. Thank you, Ryako Music, for your comment. Yeah, she says, thanks, Professor Harris. I really don't want to come across that way because I'm learning this stuff as much as anybody else is, and it is just as intimidating, or it was just as intimidating to me. And I mean, one of the reasons that I sound like I know a little bit more about what I was talking is I have a bunch of books because I'm a nerd. And if you want to get ahead of where I am in terms of talking about this stuff, this is the book to get. Bobcat, I think it's now in its 3rd edition, and I think the 3rd edition comes with a CD. But just to convey how important it is, which is the reason I picked this book out, is if I open the frontispiece, there's a chart. There you go. It's a hand-drawn frequency chart with the piano keyboard included, I might add. So I don't know if this is going to tear if I manipulate this wrong. So you can see it's got the frequency ranges at the bottom, it's got the piano keyboard, and it's got little lines showing the range of all the different instruments, from pipe organs, double bassoons, bass clarinet, 88-note piano, 82-note harp, bass viol. So they've all got ranges, they've all got sweet spots, and learning to use EQ so that each instrument gets its own sweet spot and its little peak on the equalization curve isn't being overwritten by anything else. And then that brings us as a nice amuse-bouche at the end to masking, which is when you boost one track and you kind of accidentally find that you've tromped on something else. And with Neutron, if I go back to screen 1, with Neutron, if I drop Neutron on a couple of these tracks, so we'll drop Neutron on the synth submix. Okay, and we'll call this, strangely enough, synth submix. So this is basically the tool where if you want your mixes to seriously kick ass, is where you start getting into this. So I'm going to drop another instance of Neutron on the drums. Because kind of only started work on this about half an hour before we started this podcast, I'm going to just drop another instance of Neutron on the brass because that's all I've got. So we've now got 3 instances of Neutron. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up the brass one again. And all I've got in here is an equalizer. So I'm just going to play the track. and it'll get to the horns in a moment. But you see there's a control here that says masking. So I can now listen to the drums, which are going at the moment, and when the horns start, those little orange glowy bits are where the drums and the horns are taking the same frequencies. So I can now make a decision that I can boost the horns, and as I do that, Neutron is reducing by a similar amount the drums EQ. So if I go to the drums EQ, except it hasn't. Okay. Alright, yeah. Misunderstood. So I can now drop that. So you get the idea. What you want to do is for each track when you play it with masking enabled is for stuff not to be glowing solid orange, because that means you're taking energy away from another track which maybe needs it. So you might make decisions about which track you want to boost and which track you want to cut, and the result at the end of it will be a track where everything sounds separate and clear, and that's kind of what you want, really. So, yeah, wasn't planning on demonstrating that, but it seemed like a logical way to finish things off for tonight. And that has finished things off for tonight. So I hope that was useful. I hope it was interesting. Thanks for swinging by, and I'll be doing my normal Twitch show on Thursday night, when I'll just be nerding out about music and stuff as I normally do. And then next week's 5090 show kind of got a few topics on the boil at the moment. One is guitar tone, because I know Mr. Spademan would be interested in that, and he wants me to talk through what the Ocean Machine does, and so I did promise him I'd do that at some point. I will also be doing a show on mixing basics, which is the next step really from what we've been doing this evenings and on last Sunday nights, which was just working on one track. Now we'll put all the tracks together, and that Neutron masking exercise is a kind of taster for what will happen on that. But that will happen on another day. For the moment, I will bid you good night. So wherever you are, stay safe, stay well, and stay sane. And I'll see you next time.